So yes, I'm going to tell you a few stories about Paul Bunyan. Now, I'm guessing not everybody necessarily grew up with these stories, but Paul Bunyan was a giant of the folklore of the American Midwest, of the loggers and the lumberjacks. He was a giant, literally a giant, in that he could knock down a dozen trees with one blow of his mighty axe. Now, he's mostly known for his adventures out in Wisconsin, Minnesota, states like that, where they ranged all over. He was actually born in Maine. It's just that the state was not big enough to hold him. It took 5 giant storks to deliver this baby, and they had to put him to bed in a lumber wagon pulled by a team of horses. His father would have to drive that lumber wagon up to the top of Maine and back just to rock the baby to sleep. Parents were working day and night, milking a dozen cows just to fill his milk bottle. And when he hollered, the fish would jump out of the river in confusion. Within a few days, Paul was big enough to fit in his father's clothes. And in months, he didn't fit in the house anymore. Out of desperation, his parents built a raft, and they floated him off the shore so that the waves could rock him to sleep. But when he got colicky, kind of cranky, he would cause tidal waves, sometimes 75 feet tall. After they swamped a Navy ship, they got in a little bit of trouble with the government. They decided they needed to move out west where things were a little bit more open. Well, out there, Paul grew into his career, the career he was born for, out working with these men cutting down the forests. He was a popular guy, although the men in his camp had to convince him to hold back a little bit so he wouldn't put them all out of work. Now, one of the biggest days in the life of this big man came one winter. It was so cold that the snow turned blue. And even for Paul, it was a bit of a struggle. He was knee-deep in this blue snow one day, and he heard a tiny sound. He looked down and he saw this little baby blue ox struggling along because it couldn't quite see over the snowdrifts. Paul reached down, grabbed that animal, took it home, set it by the fire till it was all fluffy and dry. But you know, that ox stayed bright blue, like it had been dyed by that snow. So Paul called him Babe the Blue Ox. Now, Babe was a valuable assistant to Paul. Around the lumber camp, they had these twisty, nasty roads, and Babe could pull anything that had 2 ends, so they just chained him to those roads and they yanked him straight. And when they were done straightening out all the roads around the logging camp, there were 30 miles of extra loads. All the twists and turns were just flopping around loose with nothing to do. So Paul just rolled them all up and he used them to pave new roads. Babe was such a mighty creature, he could haul a whole forest worth of timber at one shot. The only thing was, even for Babe, it was easier to do it in the winter, when they would slick down the roads with ice and the logs would slide along easier. Now, they had a challenge one year. The loggers came to Paul and they said, we've got this nasty river. It flips us over on our logs. We try and build a raft. It breaks the raft apart. You've got to do something about this river. Well, Paul, he wasn't actually sure what to do. He sat by the bank of the river eating popcorn. He sat there for 3 days. And there was so much popcorn that he ate, all the little flecks coming out of his beard caused a layer 19 inches deep for miles around. Some of the small animals and birds, they figured they were in a blizzard, and so they froze to death. The loggers thought that was okay. They put them in pot pies, and they had food to eat for days afterwards. Finally, Paul said, just like I did with the roads, this river has too many kinks in it. I'm going to straighten it out. That'll teach it some manners. The only thing was, how was he going to hook those logging chains around something that was made of wood? Thought about it for a little bit. He and Babe took a hike up to the North Pole. They set a big box trap and they baited it with icicles. Went away, came back a couple of hours later, and they had caught 6 young blizzards. So Paul took 2 of those blizzards, he put them in a sack, set the others free. Back at camp, they staked out the blizzards, one on either side of the river. Well, right away, the river began to freeze. In the morning, 19 miles of frozen water, one big icicle north to south. Paul took his logging chain, he wrapped it 79 times around the foot of that river, and he got Babe to pull. And Babe, as I said, was a mighty animal, but that river, it was ornery. Babe pulled, his hoofs went down to bedrock, and still that river wouldn't budge. So Paul got in there too. He pulled, and Babe pulled, and they pulled. Finally, that river came loose. They went scorching off across the prairie. That river was smoking as it went along behind them. Finally, Paul looked back. River was straight as a gun barrel. Well, there was a lot of stories about that. They were always looking for a new challenge. But I think the biggest challenge came one day when Babe fell in love. Say aw. Aww. They were walking along by the side of the road. There was a farm. Babe looked out there and he saw Bessie the yellow cow, and he was just smitten. Now, Paul tried to convince him that this was a crazy kind of love because Bessie was just a normal-sized cow, and he didn't quite see how things were going to fit. But Babe made it clear that he would do no more work until Paul bought that cow. So Paul got out his money. They took Bessie home. And as I say, things around Paul Bunyan, they tended to grow. And before long, Bessie was bigger than the barn she used to live in. The camp cook, Sourdough Sam, would make butter from her cream. It was big enough to grease that giant skittle that they used in camp with enough left over for 100 loaves of bread. The only thing Bessie and Babe ever fought about, though, was the weather. So they say, Babe liked the ice and snow. He thought it made his work a little bit easier. Bessie liked the warm summer months. One winter, Bessie got so thin and weak that Paul got kind of concerned. And so what he did was he made her a set of green goggles that she could wear so she could look out and think it was summer all year round. After that, Bessie got so fat and happy that she made enough cream that there was leftovers. Paul was able to use that to slick down those logging roads, and after that, Babe was able to haul those logs all year round just as smooth as if it was winter. He got to like the summer almost as much as Bessie did. I still think it's just as well that she could never convince him to come down to Florida to retire, though. Thank you, Toastmaster.